The Navajo Creation Story begins with the traditional words, "It happened a long time ago," they say. In the beginning, there was darkness. There was sky above and water below. Then, through a mysterious and sacred process, the sky and water came together. When they touched, creation began. This was the first world. The first world was red and was described as an island floating in a sea of mist. There were no human beings there yet. Instead, the world was inhabited by spiritual beings called the Nilchi-Dee-Nee, and by the holy people. There was no sun, moon, or stars. Instead, light came from the sky itself. The sky changed among 4 sacred colors according to the time of day. White represented dawn, blue represented daytime, yellow represented evening, and black represented night. For a long time, the beings of the first world lived peacefully. Eventually, however, their behavior began to disrupt the harmony of the world. Adultery led to jealousy, deception, and conflict. The powerful guardians of the waters warned the inhabitants 3 times that they must change their behavior. They did not listen. When they continued their behavior a 4th time, the guardians decided that they had to leave. Then the inhabitants saw what appeared to be a great wall of white approaching them from every direction. It was a flood. They flew upward toward the sky, desperately searching for a way to escape, but the sky was solid. Just when they were about to give up, a mysterious blue head appeared and directed them toward the east. There they found an opening. They passed through it and entered the second world. The second world was blue. At first it seemed empty, but eventually the newcomers discovered beings called the swallows. The swallows welcomed them as friends and relatives. Once again, however, harmony did not last. One of the newcomers behaved improperly toward the wife of the leader of the swallows. The swallows became angry and ordered them to leave. Once again, the people traveled upward until they reached another solid sky. This time, a mysterious white head appeared and directed them toward the south. The locusts led them through an opening into the third world. There they encountered the grasshoppers. Again they were welcomed. And again, the same problem occurred. One of the newcomers committed adultery with the wife of a grasshopper. The grasshoppers ordered them to leave. When they reached the sky above the third world, a red head appeared and directed them toward the west. They passed through another opening and entered the fourth world. The fourth world was black and white. In the distance stood 4 great snow-covered mountains. Eventually, the newcomers discovered another group of people living near the northern mountain. These were the Quis-Ani, or Pueblo peoples. The Pueblo peoples welcomed them and prepared a feast of corn, squash, pumpkins, and beans. This time, the newcomers decided that they would behave properly, and for a time they did. Then something extraordinary happened. A voice was heard calling from the east. After the 4th call, 4 mysterious beings appeared. They were the holy people: white body, blue body, yellow body, and black body. At first, the holy people tried to communicate through gestures. When the others could not understand them, black body finally spoke. The holy people explained that they wanted to make more people, but in forms that were more pleasing to them. But first, everyone had to purify themselves. The spiritual beings washed and dried themselves with sacred cornmeal. Then the holy people returned with buckskins and 2 perfect ears of corn, 1 white and 1 yellow. The ears of corn were placed on a buckskin and covered with another buckskin. Then a sacred wind entered between them. Mirage people walked around the buckskins. On the 4th time around, the ears of corn began to move. When the covering was lifted, a man and a woman were lying where the corn had been. The white ear of corn had become first man. The yellow ear of corn had become first woman. These were the first real human beings, created in the image of the holy people. The holy people instructed first man and first woman to build a shelter. When they entered it together, they became husband and wife. First man received rock crystal, which represented clear thought. First woman received turquoise, which represented the power of speech. Soon they had children. Their first children were a pair of twins called Nadli, people who possessed both male and female qualities. More pairs of twins followed until first man and first woman had 5 pairs of twins. The holy people took first man, first woman, and their children away for periods of instruction. They taught them how to live properly and how to conduct themselves according to their sacred origins. They also taught them prayers, songs, ceremonies, and rituals that would bless and protect future generations. As the children grew, they married among the other peoples of the Fourth World. The population increased. They planted fields of corn and other crops. They built a dam. The Nudlay watched over the dam and created pottery and basketry. For a time, the people lived peacefully and prospered. Then the sky reached downward while the earth rose upward. Where they met, two new beings appeared, Coyote and Badger. Their arrival would eventually bring both good and bad consequences. Later, First Man and First Woman had an argument. First Man became angry and convinced the men that they should leave the women and establish a separate community on the other side of the river. The Nodli went with the men and helped them cook and perform other necessary work. At first, the women seemed to prosper without the men, but over the following years, circumstances changed. Eventually, both groups realized that they could not remain separated forever. First Man and First Woman understood that their people would eventually disappear if men and women did not reunite. So the women crossed the river. The two groups came together again, and there was great celebration. But they soon discovered that 3 women were missing. A woman and her 2 daughters had been captured by the water monster. The people called upon the holy people for help. With their assistance, a rescue party descended beneath the water and found the missing women inside the water monster's dwelling. They rescued them and returned safely. But Coyote had secretly taken something. Without telling anyone, he had stolen one of the water monster's children and hidden it beneath his robe. Soon, strange things began to happen. Animals began running past the people as though they were fleeing from something. Then the people saw an enormous wall of water approaching from every direction. Another great flood was coming. The people desperately searched for a way to escape. They tried planting several kinds of trees, hoping the trees would grow high enough to carry them above the flood. But none grew high enough. Then an old man and a young man appeared. The old man brought soil gathered from 7 sacred mountains. The young man planted 32 reeds in the sacred soil. He began to sing. As he sang, the reeds grew. Eventually, all 32 reeds joined together into one enormous reed that stretched toward the sky. The people entered the reed. As the floodwaters rose, the reed grew higher and higher, carrying them upward. The holy people traveled with them. When the reed finally reached the solid sky, Locust began scratching and digging until he broke through it. One by one, the people climbed through the opening. Turkey was the last to emerge. At last, they entered the 5th world. This was the glittering world, the world in which we now live. When Coyote's theft was discovered, the water monster's child was returned. The flood immediately receded. The people began settling their new world. Then the holy people performed a test to determine whether human beings would live forever. A magical shell was thrown onto the water. If it floated, people would be immortal. If it sank, human beings would eventually die. The shell floated, the people rejoiced. But then Coyote threw a stone into the water. The stone sank. Coyote explained that if no one ever died, eventually there would be too many people and no room for everyone. The people reluctantly accepted his reasoning. Soon afterward, one of the Nodli stopped breathing. This became the first human death. With instructions from the holy people, the people prepared the body for burial. The people then began establishing their homeland in the 5th world. First Man and First Woman, assisted by the holy people, established 4 sacred mountains around the boundaries of the homeland. 3 additional sacred mountains were placed within those boundaries. Each mountain was named, decorated, and made sacred. The world also needed more light, so the sun and moon were created. The old man who had helped the people escape from the flood was given the responsibility of carrying the sun across the sky. The young man who had helped them was given the responsibility of carrying the moon through the night. The people prospered in the 5th world. But another danger soon appeared. Powerful monsters began hunting and killing the people. Their numbers became smaller and smaller until only 4 people remained in the world. Then first man began hearing the cries of a baby coming from a sacred mountain. On the fourth morning, talking God instructed him to climb the mountain. There, first man discovered an infant. She was Changing Woman, one of the most important sacred beings in the story. Because she was holy, Changing Woman grew to maturity in only 4 days. Later, after bathing in a waterfall and resting in the sunlight, she gave birth to twin sons. They were born for water and monster slayer. Like their mother, the twins grew rapidly. They had an important purpose. They would rid the land of the monsters. With help from Spider-Woman, the Sun, and other sacred helpers, the twins fought the monsters that threatened the people. Monster Slayer went out to battle them, while Born for Water remained behind and performed protective ceremonies. Eventually, most of the monsters were destroyed, but the twins allowed 4 to remain. Those 4 were old age, poverty, hunger, and cold. They were allowed to remain so that human beings would not become careless or live as though they were immortal. Once the land was safe, the Sun asked Changing Woman to become his wife. Eventually, she agreed after being promised that she would not have to leave her people forever. Before she departed, Changing Woman created more people from her own body. These people became the 4 original Navajo clans. Some traveled with Changing Woman to her home in the West, but they eventually became lonely and returned to the Navajo homeland. When their work was complete, the twin heroes also left the human world to live with the holy people. But they promised that they would continue to watch over the people. The holy people also returned to their own home, but they did not completely disappear. The story explains that they remain accessible through the prayers and songs that they gave to the people. Finally, a sacred rainbow was placed around the Navajo homeland. The rainbow served as both protection and blessing. The Navajo Creation Story is therefore not simply a story about how the world was created. It is a story of emergence. Again and again, the people move from one world into another. Their journey is not always caused by outside forces. Their own choices sometimes disrupt the harmony of the world around them, and they must face the consequences. Throughout the story, the holy people teach human beings how to live, how to pray, how to perform ceremonies, and how to maintain proper relationships with one another and with the world. Harmony is not presented as something that simply exists forever. It has to be created, protected, restored, and maintained. As you think about this creation story, consider this question. Why do you think the Navajo story describes creation as a journey through several different worlds instead of as a single moment? And think about the problems that repeatedly force the inhabitants to move or change. What does the story suggest human beings must do in order to live successfully within the world?